They say, blood is thicker than water. Maybe, but sometimes blood feels like quicksand. Pulling you down with a smile, telling you it's for your own good. My name is Elena, and trust me when I say, the most dangerous betrayals often come wrapped in the prettiest paper, handed to you by the people you're programmed to trust implicitly. This isn't just a story about money. It's about the slow, deliberate erasure of a daughter who dared to be conveniently capable. It all detonated the week before Christmas, 7 years back. I was 18, neck-deep in college applications. The real ones, the ones I was working on, dreaming of escaping Cleveland for a physics program on the coast. Then came the summons. A family meeting. My mother, Martha, called me into the living room. Dad, Richard, was there, staring intently at his untouched coffee. Leo, my golden boy younger brother, was sprawled on the sofa, radiating that effortless entitlement only a lifetime favorite can achieve. The air felt thick, staged. Like walking onto a set just before the director yells action. Only I hadn't seen the script. Elena darling, Martha began, her voice a little too bright, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. We have wonderful news. An incredible opportunity has come up. My stomach twisted. Opportunities presented by my family usually came with hidden costs for me. A prestigious youth leadership program in Austin, Richard chimed in, avoiding my gaze. Focuses on community development. We think it would be perfect for you. To find direction. Find direction. I had direction. My physics applications were almost complete. Austin, leadership. It made no sense. It starts right after the holidays, Martha added smoothly. And, the best part, it's fully funded. We even took the liberty of sending in your preliminary details. They were so impressed. Impressed by what? My dishwashing skills. They barely knew my GPA. The lie felt clumsy, transparent, yet delivered with absolute conviction. Leo smirked into his phone. That smirk, it was the tell. He knew but my college applications. I stammered, confused. Physics. Oh, physics. Martha waved a dismissive hand. Darling, that's so limited. This program offers real-world experience. College can wait a year. This is character building. Richard nodded solemnly. Your mother's right. Broadening horizons is key. It felt like they were reading lines from a bad self-help book. Lines designed to box me in, not set me free. Their unified front, the sudden, detailed plan for my life that I'd never heard of, it screamed manipulation. But arguing felt futile, like punching water. Later that night, unable to shake the gnawing unease, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. The study door, usually firmly shut, was ajar. Richard's low voice, stripped of its earlier forced enthusiasm. Definitely cleaner. This way. The merger talks in January are crucial. Asterisk. Her negativity would just complicate things. Asterisk. Martha's sharp whisper. Precisely. Let Austin handle her character building. Leo's the priority now. He represents the family's future. The right image. She's always been resourceful. She resourceful, manage. Cold hard business terms applied to their own daughter. The opportunity wasn't a gift. It was a calculated offloading of a perceived liability. Me. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a detour. It was exile. Planned and executed by the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor. And the chill that settled in my bones wasn't just from the drafty old house. It was the frost of knowing I meant absolutely nothing beyond my perceived utility, or lack thereof. My Christmas gift, it seemed, was a one-way ticket to obscurity. I packed methodically, folding sweaters alongside shattered expectations. 2 suitcases. That's all my 18 years amounted to. The goodbye at the bus station was a masterclass in feigned affection, tight hugs from Mom that felt like restraints, a stiff pat on the back from Dad, Leo scrolling through his phone the entire time. As the bus pulled away, leaving the familiar gray Cleveland skyline behind, I didn't feel adventurous. I felt surgically removed. Austin hit me like a blast furnace in January, hot, sprawling, indifferent. The program director seemed surprised to see me, handed me a pamphlet, and pointed towards a dilapidated community center. My fully funded opportunity involved sorting donated clothes in a windowless back room. I lasted 10 days, fueled by stale coffee and the growing certainty that my family hadn't just pushed me out, they'd thrown me away without a backward glance. The motel room felt like a cage. Christmas Eve passed in a blur of static from the TV and the gnawing ache of loneliness. I scrolled through Leo's Instagram, a masochistic impulse. The photos were like daggers, roaring fireplace, expensive gifts piled high, matching sweaters, triumphant smiles, #blessed #family first. The hypocrisy burned. No messages, no calls. Just silence. Complete, deafening, intentional silence. I found work at a greasy spoon diner, the late shift, smelling perpetually of fried onions and despair. Then a second job, cleaning office buildings after midnight. The emptiness of the fluorescent-lit hallways mirroring my own. Money was tight. Hope was thinner. One rainy afternoon, drenched and exhausted, I ducked into the last page. A used bookstore overflowing with the comforting scent of old paper and forgotten stories. That's where I met Mrs. Gable. She was arranging poetry books. Her silver hair pinned up loosely, her eyes missing nothing. She took one look at my soaked clothes and shivering frame. "You look like you need more than shelter, child," she said, her voice calm and kind. She didn't ask questions. She just brewed chamomile tea, offered me a dry towel, and pointed to a worn armchair. We talked for hours that afternoon. Or rather, I talked, the words spilling out, the betrayal, the loneliness, the crushing weight of being deemed disposable. She listened patiently, her gaze steady. When I finally fell silent, exhausted, she said, "Your grandmother, Eleanor, used to come in here. Fierce woman. Said you inherited her spine, even if it took a while to straighten it." That unexpected link, that mention of the grandmother who'd always championed me, felt like a lifeline thrown into a churning sea. Mrs. Gable offered me part-time work, sorting through boxes of donated books. It paid barely enough to cover instant noodles, but it was more than a job. It was quiet, it was safe. It was the first place in months I didn't feel entirely invisible. It was the beginning of something, though I didn't know what yet. Survival mode eventually morphed into something resembling a plan. It wasn't glamorous. It was fueled by caffeine, cheap textbooks from Mrs. Gable's discard pile, and sheer, unadulterated spite mixed with a desperate need to prove them wrong, mostly to myself. I enrolled in online courses at Austin Community College, focusing like a laser on data analysis, market research, and emerging tech trends, particularly in sustainable industries. My days became a relentless cycle. 4 a.m. wake up for the office, cleaning shift, classes crammed during lunch breaks at the diner, afternoons sorting dusty hardcovers at the last page, evenings spent hunched over a flickering laptop screen until my eyes burned, then collapsing into bed, only to repeat it all. My apartment, if you could call the tiny room above a noisy laundromat that felt less like home and more like a charging station. Loneliness was a constant companion, a dull ache behind my ribs. There were moments, usually around 3 a.m., when the weight of exhaustion and isolation pressed down, that I'd stare at my phone, thumb hovering over Leo's contact. The urge to just fold, to call, and beg for a scrap of connection, was almost overwhelming. What stopped me? Partly pride, partly Mrs. Gable's quiet encouragement. "Focus on building your own foundation, Elena," she'd advise, slipping me an extra 54 groceries I hadn't asked for. A house built on guilt always collapses. And then there was Leo's call. Not asking how I was, of course. He needed help decoding some market research for a presentation to Dad, research I instantly recognized from a project proposal I'd naively sent Dad months before my opportunity arose. He wanted my expertise, my analysis, without acknowledging its source or value. "Just give me the highlights, sis," he'd said casually. "You're good at this boring stuff." That boring stuff was becoming my escape hatch. I fed him just enough generic information to get him off the line. The bitterness fueling another late-night study session. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about outsmarting them at their own game, using the intellect they'd dismissed to build a world they couldn't touch. The revelation wasn't a lightning bolt, more like a slow dawn breaking through fog, combing through data for a community college project on renewable energy adoption. I saw the pattern. Countless green startups, passionate and innovative, were failing not because their ideas were bad, but because they couldn't translate their environmental impact into the language investors understood. Cold, hard market data. They needed proof of concept, market validation, ROI projections tailored to the burgeoning ESG environmental, social, governance investment world. And nobody was serving that specific, data-intensive niche for small players. I started drafting a business plan on napkins during diner breaks, sketching algorithms on the back of discarded book receipts. The idea consumed me. Mrs. Gable listened patiently to my rambling enthusiasm. "Sounds like you found your fire, child," she observed, "but fire needs fuel." My savings were non-existent. Banks wouldn't touch a concept from an unknown community. College student working 3 jobs. I pitched my idea to the retired venture capitalist Mrs. Gable had introduced me to. He was intrigued but cautious. "Prove it works on a small scale first," he advised. "Find one client, deliver results. Then we'll talk serious funding." Finding that first client felt like scaling Everest in flip-flops. I cold emailed dozens of local green businesses. Most ignored me. 1. A struggling vertical farm startup run by 2 idealistic 20-somethings, replied mostly out of desperation. "We've got nothing to lose," their email read. "Show us what you've got." I poured every spare second into their project. Using open-source tools and public datasets, working from the library until closing time, the analysis wasn't just good, it was groundbreaking for them. It identified overlooked market segments and potential investor angles they hadn't considered. They were stunned. They couldn't pay me much, just a few $100s, but their testimonial was priceless. That small success, that tangible proof that my boring stuff had real-world value, was the turning point. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building. The venture capitalist, impressed by the vertical farm results, kept his word. The seed funding wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to rent a tiny shared office space, hire 2 bright, underpaid interns, and invest in proper analytics software. Verdant Analytics officially launched, bootstrapped, and running on fumes and ambition. We focused like a laser, AI-powered market validation for small to mid-sized sustainable businesses. Our selling point wasn't just data. It was translating that data into investor-friendly narratives. The first year was brutal. Long hours, constant pitching, stretching every dollar. I remember Leo sending me a picture of his new sports car, a graduation gift from mom and dad, despite him having dropped out of college twice. "Work hard, play hard, sis." The text read. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I poured that anger into a complex algorithm refinement that landed us our second major client. We grew steadily, organically. Our reputation was built quietly through word of mouth in the green tech community. We weren't flashy, but we delivered results. Clients got funding, expanded operations, and proved their impact. Around year 5, things shifted. We developed a proprietary predictive modeling tool that caught the eye of larger firms. Suddenly, Verdant Analytics wasn't just a niche player. We were innovators. We secured Series A funding, moved to a real office, and hired experienced analysts. I was no longer just surviving. I was leading. It felt surreal, standing in our sleek new conference room, remembering the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in that laundromat apartment. News of my success must have eventually reached Cleveland. Martha sent a clipped email. "Heard you're doing well. Good for you." No warmth, no pride, just a detached acknowledgement, probably prompted by someone else mentioning it. Dad remained silent. Leo occasionally liked a company post on LinkedIn, likely without understanding what we actually did. They remained ghosts from a past I was rapidly outgrowing. Mrs. Gable, however, celebrated every milestone, framing our first positive press mention and hanging it in the bookstore. Her quiet pride meant more than any validation my family could have offered, even if they'd bothered. I was building my empire, brick by painful brick, far from their shadows. The call came not from family, but from IntegraCorp, a high-powered M&A firm known for handling sensitive corporate restructurings. They represented an anonymous client, a legacy manufacturing company in the Midwest, facing significant financial distress and needing urgent strategic guidance to pivot towards sustainable markets. My blood turned to ice. Legacy manufacturing, Midwest, sustainable pivot. It could only be one company. Richard Manufacturing. My coup, David, took the initial call. "They're desperate, Elena," he reported back later, scrolling through his notes. Sales plummeting, debt ratio through the roof. Apparently, the son's innovations involved mostly offshore gambling sites disguised as R&D. So, Leo hadn't changed. Shocking. They need market analysis, supply chain overhaul, ESG integration strategy. Basically, everything Verdant Analytics does better than anyone else. David paused. The consultant specifically mentioned they heard about our success with Greenleaf Solar last year. The irony was almost suffocating. The success stories I built were now the beacon drawing in the family who'd cast me out. Did they mention my name? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. No, David confirmed. The consultant is handling it all very discreetly. They just know they need a firm with our specific profile. A shield of plausible deniability for Richard and Martha. They could pretend they didn't know it was me, even if deep down, they suspected. Accept the meeting request, David, I instructed. Your team handles the preliminary pitch. Standard rates. No discounts. And, I paused, ensure the final presentation meeting is scheduled here, in our main conference room. I want them on my turf, and I want to be the one to deliver the final proposal personally. A cold resolve settled over me. 7 years of silence, of rebuilding, had led to this. They needed me. And they had absolutely no idea just how much. The air in conference room Alpha crackled with expensive cologne and barely concealed panic. Richard, Martha, and Leo sat on one side of the vast mahogany table, facing David and my senior strategy team. I watched from the observation room next door, the one-way glass preserving my anonymity for a few more moments. David was masterfully outlining the grim reality of their company's finances, his tone professional but firm. Richard kept interrupting, trying to spin deficits into strategic reinvestments. Martha offered vague platitudes about brand legacy. Leo mostly stared at his polished shoes. At precisely 10:30 a.m., David paused, and now, he announced, turning towards the connecting door, I'd like to introduce the CEO of Verdant Analytics, who will personally present our proposed solution. The door slid open silently. I stepped through. For a beat, there was absolute silence, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control. Then, recognition dawned. Martha let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Richard's face went slack, a mask of disbelief. Leo actually recoiled slightly in his chair, color draining from his face. It was better than I could have scripted. Elena. Richard finally choked out, his voice raspy. What? How? Good morning, Father, I said, my voice even amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. Mother Leo. I walked calmly to the head of the table, taking the seat David vacated for me. My team arranged themselves flanking me, a silent show of solidarity. Leo recovered first, summoning his usual arrogance like a shield. What is this, some kind of sick joke? The only joke here, Leo, I replied, meeting his gaze levelly, is the state you've managed to run Grandpa's company into. I gestured to the large screen at the end of the room. Shall we review the numbers? Or perhaps discuss the $1.2 million discrepancy in the R&D budget that seems to correlate directly with your online poker losses? Leo turned white as a sheet. Martha looked ready to faint. Richard slammed his fist on the table, a futile gesture of defiance. You wouldn't dare, he growled. Try me, I said softly. I built this company, Verdant Analytics, from nothing. I built it on integrity, data, and results. Concepts Richard Manufacturing seems to have forgotten. Now Yahave, come to us for help. Let's talk about what that help actually looks like. The power in the room had shifted, tangibly, irrevocably. The rejected daughter was now the only one who could save them. My proposal wasn't an investment. It was a lifeline with chains attached. I laid it out, point by unforgiving point, watching their reactions shift from disbelief to dawning horror. Verdant Analytics will acquire a controlling interest -65% of Richard Manufacturing. I began, my voice devoid of emotion. This is non-negotiable. Martha choked back a sob. Richard gripped the table edge, knuckles white. Operational control transfers immediately to my appointed team, I continued. Richard, you will retain a minority stake and an honorary title, Founder Emeritus, with zero decision-making power. His face purpled, but he remained silent, trapped. Leo, I turned to my brother, whose attempt at bravado had completely evaporated. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out after this meeting. Furthermore, you will sign a non-compete agreement, and, I paused, letting the weight settle. You will enter a certified treatment program for gambling addiction. Funded by a trust I will establish, contingent on successful completion. Relapse violates the terms. You can't do this. Leo finally exploded, half rising from his chair. I built relationships. You leveraged relationships built by our grandfather and nearly bankrupted his legacy, I shot back, my voice like ice. Sit down, He sat, deflated. Martha started pleading. Elena, please. He's your brother. Think of the family's reputation. I am thinking of the family's reputation. Mother, I said sharply. The one you were all so worried about when you pushed me out. This is how we salvage what's left of it, by removing the rot. I slid the final page across the table. There's a personal conduct clause. Any attempt to undermine my team, manipulate finances, or engage in public disparagement of Verdant Analytics or myself results in immediate forfeiture of Richard's remaining shares and triggers legal action. It was checkmate, delivered on company letterhead. They stared at the document, the ink stark against the white paper, sealing their fate. You have 1 hour to sign, I concluded, rising. My legal team is waiting next door. Choose wisely. Bankruptcy is a very public affair. I walked towards the door, pausing only to look back at their stunned, broken faces. This wasn't the sweet revenge fantasies sometimes provide. This was cold, hard consequence. And it was entirely of their own making. They signed, of course. They signed. Pride is cold comfort when faced with utter ruin. The aftermath wasn't pretty, but it was orderly. My team, led by David, moved into Richard Manufacturing like surgeons, excising a tumor. Leo was gone within the hour, escorted out past stunned employees. Richard retreated to his now purely ceremonial office, a ghost haunting his own legacy. Martha tried calling Mrs. Gable, Aunt Diane, anyone who would listen, painting herself as the victim of a corporate coup by her own daughter, but the personal conduct clause in the agreement had teeth, and my lawyers politely reminded her of the consequences of public disparagement. The calls stopped. The company, under competent leadership, began its slow recovery. Debts were restructured, inefficient processes were streamlined. Surprisingly, Richard occasionally offered genuinely useful insights from his founder emeritus position. Stripped of ego and the need to impress. It was the first time I'd seen the businessman Grandpa must have once respected. Leo entered rehab. Reports were initially rocky, but he stuck with it. 6 months later, he sent me a short, handwritten note, not an apology, but an acknowledgement, starting over. Hope you find peace. It was more than I expected. Martha remained the most resistant, retreating into a world of quiet resentment. But even she, faced with the reality of needing to manage her own finances for the first time in decades, started attending a community financial literacy class. Baby steps. I visited Mrs. Gable often, sharing quiet cups of tea amidst the comforting clutter of her bookstore. You gave them a chance to rebuild, Elena, she'd said. Not just the company, but themselves. Whether they take it is up to them. So, the empire I built in secret ended up consuming the one I was denied. Is it justice, karma, or just the inevitable outcome when foundations built on lies finally crumble? I don't know. What I do know is that the silence in my life now feels different. It's not the heavy silence of being ignored, but the expansive quiet of earned peace. Verdant Analytics continues to thrive, and Richard Manufacturing, under new leadership, is slowly finding its footing in the modern market. We don't have big family dinners anymore. Holidays are quiet, separate affairs. Maybe someday that will change, maybe it won't. I didn't set out to destroy them. I set out to save myself. And in doing so, I inadvertently forced them to confront the wreckage they'd created. The biggest lesson: you cannot control how others treat you, but you absolutely control whether you continue to accept it. Walking away, setting boundaries, reclaiming your worth, it isn't an act of war. It's an act of profound self-respect. It's telling the world, and more importantly, yourself, that you will not be defined by someone else's limitations or jealousy. My failure became my freedom. My disappointment became my driving force. So if you're out there feeling invisible, underestimated, like the family liability, remember this: your worth isn't determined by their validation. Build your own table, create your own legacy, and never, ever let anyone convince you that your strength is a burden they shouldn't have to carry. The fire in your belly, let it burn bright. It might just light the way out of the darkness. Elena's story is a powerful reminder that your worth isn't defined by the people who try to diminish you, even when it's family. It's about finding your own strength, setting boundaries, and building a life on your own terms. Have you ever felt invisible or underestimated? Have you had to fight to reclaim your own narrative? Share your story, your thoughts, or just a word of support in the comments below. Your voice matters, and you're not alone in this journey. Let's build a community where resilience is celebrated. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more stories of strength and survival, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.